The aliens should have feared humans from the very start, but their arrogance would cost the Galactic Council in blood. Orin rushed through the opulent halls of the Council headquarters, his three-fingered hand gripping a datapad. He burst into the chambers and found his seat at the curved table. 12 alien species all stared at the grim insectoid leader, Zoltan, as he banged his gavel. The humans have developed faster-than-light travel and contacted the Council, but they've already begun claiming star systems as their own. Zoltan clicked his mandibles together rapidly. These humans are unpredictable, violent conquerors. Their history is filled with war, leading up to weapons that destroyed their own world. We cannot allow them free rein to turn such weapons on us. Orin stood, his blue skin flushing. The humans achieved FTL remarkably fast. That alone makes them valuable potential allies. We must not act rashly. Naive fool, spat Zoltan. Humans will betray any trust given them. We must strike first with all our might before they can unleash their devastating power. Murmurs of agreement rumbled through the Council. Orin collapsed into his chair as a fleet was assembled to confront the human threat, but he couldn't shake his unease. For the arrogant Galactic Council was about to learn that it should have heeded those early warnings to fear mankind, the hard way. After the disastrous Council meeting, Orin knew he had to act fast. He discreetly contacted his old friend David Johnson, the human ambassador. They arranged to meet covertly on Orin's private ship, where they could talk freely without the Council eavesdropping. As soon as David stepped aboard, Orin pulled him aside. "David, I have grave news. The Council plans to launch a massive preemptive strike against humanity. They're already gathering the fleet. You must convince your leaders to negotiate a truce before it's too late." David's face turned grim as he absorbed Orin's warning. He sighed heavily and met Orin's gaze. "Orin, you've known me a long time. Have humans ever been the aggressors? No, we fight only to defend ourselves. But it seems the Council is leaving us no choice. If they're mobilizing to attack, then we won't just lie down and take it." Orin's heart sank at David's words. As much as he wanted to deny it, he knew the human spoke the truth. "There must be something you can do. Humanity is vastly outnumbered. The Council's armada will slaughter your people." To Orin's shock, David just laughed and slapped him on the back. "I wouldn't be so sure about that, my friend. Did I ever tell you about one of the most legendary battles in human history?" Despite the direness of the situation, Orin found himself intrigued. He leaned forward as David launched into the tale. Thousands of years ago, the mighty Persian Empire sought to conquer the Greek city-states. They amassed an army of hundreds of thousands, but at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, just 300 Spartan warriors stood against them. Orin listened in awe as David described how the vastly outnumbered Spartans used brilliant tactics and unbreakable resolve to hold off the Persians for days, inflicting massive casualties. These ancient humans, armed with nothing but spears and shields, had achieved the impossible through sheer skill and indomitable will. As the story ended, an unsettled realization crept over Orin. He had always seen humans as primitive, but never imagined they were capable of such feats, even millennia ago. If those long-ago Spartans could overcome such odds, what might modern humans, with all their advanced and terrifying weapons, be able to do? He shuddered at the thought. Perhaps the Council had badly underestimated them. As the tale of Thermopylae drew to a close, Orin's wrist communicator chimed insistently. With an apologetic glance at David, he tapped the flashing screen. His blue skin paled as he scanned the urgent message from his aide. "By the stars," Orin breathed, meeting David's questioning gaze. "The Council's war fleet just departed for human space. They mean to launch an all-out surprise attack." David's expression turned grim, but he seemed unsurprised by the news. Rising to his feet, the human ambassador clasped his hands behind his back. "Then I need to return and warn my people immediately." He paused, holding up a hand as Orin opened his mouth to speak. "But before I depart, let me share one final tale from Earth's history." Despite the urgency of the situation, Orin found himself nodding for David to continue. There was something compelling about these glimpses into humanity's past. During the Second World War, one of the greatest conflicts ever to engulf my species, the island nation of Japan launched a surprise assault on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. David's voice was solemn as he recounted the infamous attack. The Japanese hoped that by crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet in a single decisive strike, they could force America to sue for peace on their terms. The human ambassador let his words hang in the air for a moment. But the attack didn't quite have the intended effect. While the Japanese succeeded in damaging several battleships, they failed to destroy the critical fuel depots and repair facilities. More crucially, the American aircraft carriers were out at sea and escaped unscathed. David met Orin's gaze intently, his next words ringing with significance. In the end, all Pearl Harbor truly accomplished was awakening a sleeping giant and filling it with a terrible resolve. The human's jaw set as he drove his point home. Mark my words, Orin. That is the exact mistake the Galactic Council is about to make with humanity. In their arrogance, they think they can subdue us with a single swift stroke, but they're only going to stir up a hornet's nest. He shook his head, almost pitying. I fear they're about to learn the same harsh lesson Imperial Japan did. Don't provoke a slumbering titan. Alone with his racing thoughts, Orin stared out the viewport at the stars, wondering uneasily which prospect was more terrifying, the Galactic Council's arrogant assumptions of an easy victory, or the humans' apparent eagerness for the coming fight. One thing was certain, the ambassador mused grimly as he watched David's ship slip into the void. After the smoke of the approaching battle cleared, the galaxy would never be quite the same. Weeks dragged by in tense silence following David's departure. Orin tried to focus on his diplomatic duties, but his thoughts kept drifting uneasily to the looming confrontation between the Galactic Council's forces and the humans. Then the summons came. An emergency session of the Council effective immediately. Orin's hearts hammered as he hurried through the halls to the central chamber. The large round room was already filled to capacity, the air thick with nervous energy. As Orin slid into his seat, he noted with a shiver the shell-shocked expressions worn by the assembled delegates. Zoltan, the council leader, rose slowly to his feet. The insectoid's carapace was dull, his movements heavy with exhaustion and something akin to dread. He called the session to order, his normally imperious voice strained and faltering. "Esteemed members of the council," Zoltan began haltingly, "I have grave news. The battle fleet we dispatched to subdue the humans," he trailed off, seeming to struggle for words, "has been lost, completely and utterly destroyed." Stunned silence reigned for a long moment, before the chamber erupted into a cacophony of shocked gasps and disbelieving shouts. Zoltan raised his gavel, banging it repeatedly for order. When the tumult finally died down, he continued his grim report. "The humans, their ships flew with a skill and ferocity unlike anything our forces have ever encountered. Though vastly outnumbered, they danced amidst our fleet, striking with surgical precision to cripple key systems before darting away." Zoltan's mandibles quivered. "Our ships were caught completely off guard by their unconventional tactics. The fleet quickly fell into disarray and was routed." He paused, as if steeling himself to deliver even more devastating news. Those few ships that did manage to disengage and flee were mercilessly pursued by the human vessels. The humans, they allowed our ships to transmit frantic distress calls before destroying them. Not a single ship made it back. Orin listened in numb, growing horror as the terrible toll became clear. The Council had catastrophically underestimated the humans and paid a blood price. As the chamber erupted into frenzied argument, he sank back in his chair, his mind reeling. Panicked delegates shouted over one another, some demanding the immediate assembly of an even larger fleet to crush the human threat, while others fearfully insisted that the Council needed to sue for peace at once before the humans launched a devastating counter-offensive. Throughout the growing din, Orin remained silent and unmoving, his thoughts far away. Unbidden, David's parting words echoed in his mind. "I almost pity them." At the time, he hadn't fully grasped the human's meaning. Now, as he surveyed the chaos engulfing the Council, He understood with a sinking clarity. The Galactic Council, in its arrogance and aggression, had indeed made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity. And now, Orin feared, the entire galaxy may soon pay the price for that hubris. As if summoned by his dark musings, a strident alarm began blaring through the chamber, drowning out the arguing voices. Zoltan activated his holocom with shaking hands. An aide's face sprang to life in projection, wide-eyed and quaking. "Counselor, sensors are detecting a massive formation of human ships approaching Council space at high speeds. What are your orders?" Orin slipped away from the chaos engulfing the Council chamber, his thoughts whirling. He needed advice, perspective. Before he even realized where his feet were taking him, he found himself standing outside the modest dwelling of his old mentor, Zephyr. The retired diplomat answered Orin's knock, his craggy face creasing into a welcoming smile. "Orin, my boy, come in, come in." Settling into a worn but comfortable chair, Orin poured out the whole sordid tale, the disastrous battle, the Council's panicked reaction, his own growing sense of dread. Zephyr listened intently, never interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When Orin finally fell silent, Zephyr leaned back, steepling his long fingers. "You know," he said slowly, "this reminds me of a story from the early days of the Council, long before your time." Orin straightened, intrigued despite his turmoil. Zephyr's stories were always illuminating. "Centuries ago," Zephyr began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence, "the Council encountered a race called the Kradesh. They were much like your humans, newly FTL capable and eager to explore. But there was one key difference. The Kradesh were conquerors," Zephyr said grimly. "They enslaved every race they met. The Council, still young and idealistic, tried to reason with them, to find a peaceful solution." Zephyr sighed heavily. "It was a disaster. The Kradesh had weapons we'd never seen. They tore through our ships like they were made of paper. The few that survived limped home in tatters." Orin felt a chill race down his spine. The parallels were unsettling. "The Council learned a hard lesson that day," Zephyr said. "Sometimes the only way to counter a threat is to meet it head-on, with overwhelming force. We've never forgotten it." He fixed Orin with a piercing stare. "And now it seems the Council is about to learn that lesson all over again, this time from your humans." Orin nodded slowly, a cold weight settling in his gut as the full scope of the danger crystallized in his mind. The Council had gravely underestimated the humans, just as they once had the Kradesh. And if they didn't learn from that mistake quickly? Orin feared his people, and the whole galaxy would soon pay a steep price in blood and fire. Orin's head spun as he digested Talara's revelations. The notion that the humans, these fearsome warriors who had just annihilated the Galactic Council's mightiest fleet, might actually desire peace, seemed almost too good to be true. He leaned forward, studying the Vashani diplomat intently. "Talara, are you certain of Ambassador Johnson's sincerity? This isn't some kind of trick?" Orin's voice was tinged with a mix of hope and wariness. Talara met his gaze steadily, her large luminous eyes radiating earnestness. "Orin, I stake my people's reputation on it. In all our dealings, the humans have been straightforward, even blunt. Deception doesn't seem to be their way." She tapped the data pad meaningfully. "And this treaty is proof of their intentions. They could have demanded far harsher terms given their military advantage. Instead, they're offering a fair compromise. Equality." Orin nodded slowly, his mind racing as he scanned the document again. A seat on the Council for Humanity, in exchange for an end to hostilities. It was a bold proposal, but one that could change the galaxy forever, and for the better. He looked up at Talara. "What you're saying about the humans, it reminds me of something my friend David once told me, about how his people only fight to defend themselves." Orin's voice grew distant, reflective. "At the time I didn't fully grasp his meaning, but now—" Talara laid a slender hand on Orin's arm, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Now you understand. The humans aren't conquerors, Orin. They're just a young race, seeking their place in the stars. But to get there, They need a partner, not an enemy. She pushed the datapad towards him meaningfully. You could be that partner, Orin. You have the Council's ear. Convince them to accept this treaty, and you won't just be averting a war. You'll be building a bridge to a brighter future for us all. Orin exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He thought of all the fear and mistrust that had led to this point, the arrogance and aggression on both sides. But he also thought of David's stories, of the indomitable human spirit that had overcome impossible odds time and again. With sudden clarity, he knew what he had to do. Orin stood, grasping the datapad tightly. I'll do it, Talara. I'll bring this proposal to the Council. It won't be easy. There are many who still see the humans as a threat to be crushed, but by the stars, I'll make them see reason. He squared his shoulders, a newfound sense of purpose burning in his chest. The cycle of violence ends here. It's time for a new era, one of peace, of cooperation, and if I have to drag the Council kicking and screaming into it, then so be it. Talara rose as well, hope and gratitude shining in her eyes. The Vashani will stand with you, Orin, as will the humans. Together, we can make this dream a reality. As they shook hands, sealing their pact, Orin felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time: optimism. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a galaxy not consumed by war, but united in common purpose. It was a future worth fighting for, and fight he would with every fiber of his being. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Orin and Talara stood hand in hand, two disparate beings united by a shared vision of a better tomorrow. Then, with a final nod of resolve, Orin turned and strode from the room, the datapad clutched to his chest like a talisman against the darkness. As he made his way through the corridors of the Vashani ship, Orin's mind raced ahead, already formulating arguments and counter-arguments, mapping out the treacherous political landscape he would need to navigate to bring this fragile peace into being. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The scars of the recent battle were still raw, the fear and mistrust on both sides running deep. But he also knew with a bone-deep certainty that this was a pivotal moment, a turning point that would echo through the ages. The choices made in the coming days would shape the course of galactic history, for good or ill. And Orin was determined to ensure it was for good. Too much blood had already been spilled, too many lives shattered on the altar of fear and pride. It was time, at long last, for a new way forward. As he boarded his own shuttle, Orin allowed himself a moment to marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this juncture. A humble diplomat thrust into the heart of the greatest crisis the galaxy had ever known. But perhaps, he mused, that was exactly what this moment called for. Not a warrior or a politician, but a peacemaker. Someone who could see past the anger and the pain to the common hopes and dreams that bound all sentient beings. Orin settled into his seat as the shuttle lifted off, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. Somewhere out there, he knew, David was fighting the same battle on the human side, working to convince his own people to choose the path of peace. The thought gave Orin strength, even as it underscored the enormity of the task before them. But he would not falter, not now, not when the stakes were so high. For the sake of his people, for the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of a future where humans and the myriad races of the Council could stand as one, Orin would see this through. No matter the cost. His resolve hardened into a core of unbreakable diamond. Orin watched the Vashani ship dwindle into the distance until it was lost in the endless expanse of space. Then he turned his gaze forward to the challenges ahead. It was time to begin. Orin's heart raced as he strode into the council chamber, the weight of the datapad heavy in his hand. This was it, the moment of truth. If he could just convince the council to accept the humans' offer of peace, then perhaps this destructive cycle of fear and aggression could finally be broken. But as he took his seat, Orin could already feel the hostility radiating from the assembled delegates. Zoltan, the council leader, gavelled the session to order, his compound eyes glittering with barely suppressed rage. Orin, Zoltan hissed, I trust you have a very good explanation for why you've been colluding with the enemy behind the Council's back. Orin rose to his feet, holding up the datapad. I haven't been colluding with anyone, he said firmly, but the Vashani have brought us an opportunity we can't afford to ignore. The humans are offering a treaty. The chamber erupted into chaos before he could even finish. Traitor! Someone shouted. He sold us out to the humans! Cried another. Zoltan banged his gavel repeatedly, mandibles clicking with agitation. Order? We will have order. Orin tried again. Please, just listen. The humans want peace. Peace? A deep grating voice interrupted. Orin turned to see a new delegation entering the chamber, led by a massive, heavily scarred Zorgian. You're even more naive than I thought, Orin. The Zorgian ambassador, Crag, shouldered his way to the center of the room, his mere presence seeming to fill the space. He fixed Orin with a contemptuous glare. You're all fools if you think the humans can be trusted, Crag snarled, slamming a meaty fist on the council table. The bang made Orin jump. Have you forgotten the lessons of the Kradesh so easily? The only language creatures like the humans understand is force. Crag began to pace, his every step shaking the floor. We must strike now with everything we have before the humans have a chance to regroup and hit us first. This treaty, he spat the word like venom, is nothing but a ploy to make us lower our guard. To Orin's dismay, many of the councillors were nodding along with Crag's words, fear and anger plain on their faces. He tried once more to be the voice of reason. But the humans have shown good faith, Orin argued. They could have pressed their advantage, but instead they're extending an olive branch. Surely that counts for something. Crag rounded on him with a sneer. You're as naive as a hatchling, Orin. Let me tell you a story. The Zorgian's eyes took on a faraway look, as if seeing into the distant past. During the Kradesh War, my people tried to negotiate too. We sent an envoy, offering a deal. If the Kradesh withdrew from our space, we'd give them exclusive rights to our richest mining worlds. Crag's hands clenched into fists. The Kradesh agreed, and like fools we believed them. We let our guard down. His voice dropped to a growl. And the moment our defenses were lowered, the Kradesh invaded in force, conquering our worlds and enslaving our people. He leaned forward, eyes burning into Orin's. We learned an important lesson that day. Never trust an enemy who smiles to your face, because they're just waiting to stab you in the back. Orin's heart sank as he saw Crag's words hitting home, saw the councillors' expressions hardening with renewed fear and suspicion. But he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when peace was so close. He opened his mouth to argue further, but before he could utter a word, the chamber doors slammed open with a boom. Every head turned to stare at the imposing figure who strode through, flanked by a phalanx of armed guards. The chamber doors slammed open with a boom. Every head turned to stare at the imposing figure who strode through, flanked by a phalanx of armed guards. It was David. Orin's heart leapt into his throat as the human ambassador marched into the center of the council chamber, his expression resolute. The guards at David's side kept their hands on their weapons, eyeing the assembled councillors warily. Zoltan surged to his feet, his carapace flushing with rage. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he snarled. "How dare you barge in here uninvited?" David held up a placating hand. "I come in peace," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I apologize for the abrupt entrance, but I bear an urgent message that cannot wait." He turned to face the councillors, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "I understand your fears," David said. "The unknown is always frightening, and my people's sudden arrival has upended the balance of power you've long maintained. I don't blame you for being wary." David shook his head. "I understand your mistrust, Ambassador Crag. Your people suffered greatly at the hands of the Kradesh, but I assure you, we humans are not like them." He took a step forward, his voice rising with conviction. "Yes, we fought fiercely when your fleet attacked us, but we did so only to defend ourselves, not out of any desire for conquest or domination. And even now, in the aftermath of that battle, we still seek peace." David held up a datapad, the same one Orin had tried to present earlier. This treaty is proof of our intentions. We're offering to join the Galactic Council as equals, to work alongside you in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. All we ask in return is an end to hostilities between our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the councillors exchanged uncertain glances. Orin held his breath, hardly daring to hope. But Crag was unmoved. "Pretty words," he growled, "but they mean nothing. You humans are too dangerous to be trusted. The only way to ensure the safety of the galaxy is to wipe you out, here and now." The Zorgian leapt to his feet, drawing a wicked-looking blaster from his belt. His guards followed suit, leveling their weapons at David. Orin surged forward, desperate to stop the impending bloodshed. But before he could take more than a step, the chamber erupted into chaos. Council guards swarmed in from all sides, surrounding Crag and his entourage with raised weapons. Shouted orders and threats filled the air as tensions soared to a breaking point. Through it all, David remained motionless, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "There's no need for violence. We can still resolve this peacefully." But Crag wasn't listening. With a roar of rage, he aimed his blaster squarely at David's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Orin watched in horror, helpless to intervene. And then, just as Crag's weapon reached firing position, a staccato burst of blaster fire rang out from behind Orin. He whirled to see Talara standing in the entrance to the chamber, a smoking blaster in her hands. Crag crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering from his grasp. His guards, caught off guard by the sudden attack from the rear, quickly found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Within moments, they too were disarmed and restrained. In the sudden, stunned silence that followed, Talara lowered her blaster and stepped forward to stand beside Orin. "Apologies for my tardiness," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I came as soon as I heard what was happening." She turned to face the councillors, her expression resolute. "Honoured members of the council, I beg you to heed Ambassador Johnson's words. The path of war and mistrust will only lead to more suffering for all our peoples. But if we can find the courage to forge a new path, one of peace and understanding, there's no limit to what we might achieve together." Orin felt a surge of hope as he saw the councillors exchange thoughtful looks, some even nodding slowly. Beside him, David offered a small, grateful smile. There was still much work to be done, Orin knew. Generations of fear and prejudice could not be undone in a single moment, but for the first time, he dared to believe that a brighter future was possible, one where humans and the myriad races of the galaxy could stand as one. It would take time and patience, and no small amount of courage. But as Orin looked around at the faces of his fellow councillors, seeing the first tentative glimmers of understanding dawning in their eyes, he felt a renewed sense of purpose kindling in his chest. Come what may, he would see this through, for his people, for the galaxy, and for the dream of a universe united in common cause. The road ahead would be long and hard, but Orin had never been more certain that it was a journey worth taking. He squared his shoulders as the councillors slowly retook their seats, the chamber settling into a tense but hopeful silence. There was still much to discuss and many fears to allay. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Orin felt the stirrings of something he had once thought lost forever, the belief that no matter how dark the night, a new dawn was always waiting just over the horizon. As David stepped forward to address the council once more, Orin found himself leaning in eagerly, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Together. As the council chamber doors swung open, Orin strode in, his head held high. The weight of his conversation with David settled in his chest, a glowing ember of hope amidst the ashes of the council's fear and mistrust. He took his place at the center of the room, meeting the gazes of the assembled delegates one by one. In some he saw uncertainty, in others naked hostility. But in a few there was a glimmer of something else, a willingness, however tentative, to listen. Orin cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice ringing with conviction. "Esteemed members of the council," he said, I come before you today with a message of hope, a message that was given to me by none other than the human ambassador himself." A ripple of murmurs ran through the chamber, some curious, others derisive. Orrin pressed on undeterred. "In my conversation with Ambassador Johnson, he spoke of humanity's desire for peace. He reminded me that even in the face of our aggression, the humans chose to extend an olive branch rather than press their advantage." Orrin paused, letting his words sink in. He could see some of the delegates shifting in their seats, their expressions thoughtful. Across the room, Crag, the Zorgian ambassador, snorted in contempt. "Pretty words, Orrin," he sneered. "But you're forgetting one thing. The humans are not like us. They're dangerous, unpredictable. We can't trust them." Orrin turned to face Crag directly, his expression earnest. "Ambassador Crag, I understand your reservations," he said diplomatically. "The wounds of the Kradesh War run deep, and the scars they left on your people are still fresh. But let me ask you this. After the war, did the Zorgians not eventually make peace with the Kradesh?" Orrin nodded in acknowledgement. "I understand your fear, Ambassador, but consider this. The humans could have pressed their advantage after the battle, invaded council space and conquered us all. But instead, they chose to offer us a hand in friendship. Does that not speak to their true intentions?" Crag fell silent, his brow furrowed as he seemed to wrestle with himself. The chamber held its breath, waiting for his response. Finally, after a long moment, Crag sighed heavily. "There may be some wisdom in your words, Orrin," he conceded. "The humans have indeed shown restraint when they had every reason to seek vengeance. Perhaps it is time for us to do the same." Slowly, ponderously, Crag rose to his feet. He turned to face the rest of the council, his voice booming with newfound conviction. "My people have a saying," he declared. "The strongest warrior is not the one who always fights, but the one who knows when not to. I say it is time for the Galactic Council to be that warrior. Let us not repeat the mistakes of the past, but instead seize this chance for a new beginning." A hush fell over the council chamber as Crag's words sank in. Then, slowly at first, but with growing momentum, the delegates began to nod and murmur their assent. Orrin felt a rush of relief and gratitude. It seemed, against all odds, that the tide had finally turned towards peace. But even as hope swelled in his chest, Orrin knew that their work was far from over. The council may have been swayed, but they were only a small part of a vast, diverse galaxy. The true challenge still lay ahead, convincing the rest of the myriad races and factions to give humanity a chance, to see them not as conquerors or threats, but as potential friends and allies. It would be a long and difficult road, fraught with obstacles and setbacks, but for the first time in ages, Orrin allowed himself to believe that it was a road worth traveling, a road that could lead, at long last, to a galaxy united not by fear, but by understanding. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he faced the council once more. There was much still to be done, and the path ahead was far from certain. But one thing was clear. The journey towards peace had begun, and there could be no turning back now. Orrin would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. For the sake of his people, for the sake of the galaxy, and for the sake of the brave, stubborn, remarkable humans who had forced them all to confront their deepest fears and prejudices, and emerge stronger for it. Orrin smiled to himself as the council erupted into animated discussion around him, already debating the next steps, the first tentative plans for outreach and diplomacy. Yes, he thought, the humans had much to teach them indeed, and he, for one, was ready to learn. As the council session adjourned, Orrin found himself approached by delegate after delegate, each eager to discuss the implications of the day's events. Some expressed cautious optimism, others open skepticism. But all seemed to sense that they were standing on the precipice of something momentous. Orrin fielded their questions and concerns as best he could, his mind still whirling with the magnitude of the task before them. Convincing the council to accept the peace treaty had been a crucial first step, but it was only the beginning. They would need to reach out to the leaders of the galaxy's many races and factions, some of whom had nursed grudges against each other for centuries. They would need to find common ground to build bridges of trust and understanding where before there had been only suspicion and hostility. It would be a monumental undertaking, one that would test the limits of their diplomacy and resolve. But Orin knew they had no choice. The alternative, a galaxy consumed by war and hatred, was too terrible to contemplate. As the last of the delegates filed out of the chamber, Orin allowed himself a moment to savor the quiet. He stepped over to the large viewport that dominated one wall, gazing out at the stars that glittered against the inky void. Somewhere out there he knew David and his fellow humans were watching and waiting, hoping against hope for a sign that their gambit had paid off, that their offer of peace would be accepted, and a new era of cooperation could begin. Orin pressed a hand against the cool glass, silently making a promise to the distant Earth. They had taken the first steps on the long road to reconciliation. Now it was up to him, and to all of them, to see it through. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what obstacles and enemies they might face, but he did know one thing. He would not rest until the dream of a united galaxy, one where humans and the myriad races of the Council stood as equals and allies, was made reality. With a final nod to the stars, Orin turned away from the viewport and strode from the chamber, his footsteps ringing with newfound purpose. There was much work to be done. Orin peered through the viewport, watching the stars streak by outside the human ship. He marveled at the sleek design of the vessel, so different from the bulky, utilitarian craft favored by the Council races. It was a testament to human ingenuity, he mused, that they had come so far so quickly. The sound of footsteps behind him drew Orin's attention. He turned to see David approaching, a pensive expression on the human ambassador's face. Orin offered a tentative smile as David came to stand beside him at the viewport. "I have to admit I'm nervous," Orin confessed, his voice low. "After all the fear and mistrust between our peoples, I don't know what kind of reception to expect from your leaders." David chuckled, but there was an edge of unease to the sound. "To be honest, I'm a little nervous too," he admitted. "Not all humans were in favor of extending the olive branch. Some thought we should have pressed our advantage, taken control of the Council while we had the chance." Orin frowned, troubled by this revelation. He turned to face David fully. "But surely with the treaty signed, those voices will be silenced." David sighed heavily, shaking his head. "I wish I could say yes, but the thing about humans is we're a diverse and opinionated bunch. Even now, back on Earth, there are factions arguing that we can't trust the Council, that we need to build up our military might to protect ourselves from future threats." Orin felt a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. After all they had been through, all the progress they had made, could it really be so fragile? He opened his mouth to voice his concerns, but David held up a hand. "You know, there's a famous human novel called 1984, David said, his tone growing somber. "It depicts a dystopian future where the world is divided into 3 perpetually warring superstates. The protagonist comes to realize that the endless cycle of conflict is actually a tool used by those in power to control the population through fear and hatred." David turned to face Orin, his expression grave. "I fear that if we're not careful, if we let the voices of extremism and paranoia drown out the calls for peace, we could be headed for a similar future." Orin felt a chill run down his spine at David's words. He had seen firsthand the destructive power of fear and mistrust, had watched it nearly tear the galaxy apart. The thought that they could be standing on the precipice of that abyss once more was deeply unsettling. As their ship approached Earth, the blue-green globe growing larger in the viewport, Orin couldn't help but wonder what challenges and obstacles still lay ahead. The treaty may have been a historic first step, but the journey was far from over. The old cycle of fear and aggression still cast a long shadow, and it would take more than words on paper to truly break its hold. Orin glanced over at David, seeing his own concerns mirrored in the human's eyes. They had come so far, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. It would take courage, determination, and no small amount of faith to see it through. But as he watched the cradle of humanity grow larger before them, Orin felt a flicker of hope. They had already achieved the impossible, had brought two warring peoples to the negotiating table against all odds. If they could do that, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to build a lasting peace. It would be a struggle, Orin knew, a fight for the very soul of the galaxy. But it was a fight he was ready to take on, side by side with his human allies. For the sake of all their peoples, for the dream of a future free from the shackles of hate and fear, they had to try. The ship shuddered slightly as it began its approach, angling towards the glittering lights of a sprawling city on the planet's night side. Orin took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.